He spent 10 minutes tearing into law enforcement, calling them agents of tyranny. Then Pam Bondi stood up, stayed calm, and dismantled him so thoroughly he couldn't even look her in the eye. Nobody in that chamber expected her to say a word. It was a grey. Thursday morning, inside the Dirksen Senate office building, in Washington, D.C. Room 2, 26 fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead, casting a dry glow across the Polish table where politicians sat and tailored suits, clutching notes they barely read most hearings. Went the same way long-winded speeches, partisan grandstanding, and tired rebuttals meant more for headlines than real change. But that morning something was different. Not in the air, not in the agenda, but in the way Pam Bondi sat. She was quiet, sure still, calm even, but her eyes fixed, calculated. She wasn't just there to listen. The session had opened just 20 minutes earlier, already bogged down by the usual procedural tug of war. The topic was oversight and accountability in federal law enforcement. Mouthful, but it boiled down to one thing: blame. The police blame federal agents, blame old systems, blame each other. Everyone came in ready to point fingers. Across from Bondi sat Senator Curtis Halbridge of Oregon, sharp, jawline, white hair combed to perfection, thick glasses that made him look more like a professor than a lawmaker. He was in a second term and had recently made a name for himself on cable news with his bold, often controversial critiques of American law enforcement. His words got clicks. That was the currency. Now let's stop pretending this is about justice, Halbert said as he leaned forward, voice theatrical. It's about control. The very institutions we created to serve and protect have become tools of political convenience. We've seen it over. Reaching federal raids, abuse of surveillance powers in systemic bias, rooted deep in the structure. If we don't dismantle this, we're complicit. He paused for dramatic effect, glancing briefly at the camera. So few heads nodded around him, some with agreement, some just wanting the moment to end. Bondi didn't move, she didn't blink. Halbridge continued, and let me say this clearly: those who defend the current system, those who cheer for it, they're not patriots. They're apologists for tyranny. That landed hard. A few audible exhales broke the room's rhythm. Pam sat with her arms gently crossed back, straight, expression unreadable. You could see her listening, truly listening, not just to the words, but to the tone, the implications, the arrogance. To most, she was best known for her role as Florida's Attorney General from 2011 to 2019. To others, she was a sharp legal mind who didn't sugarcoat anything. But what fewer people knew was that Bondi didn't care for theatrics, and she certainly didn't care for being talked down. The senator's monologue went on for another 5 minutes. He quoted obscure policy memos, referred vaguely to whistleblowers, and accused unnamed agents of protecting their political masters. His voice never cracked, but his message was clear. Pam wasn't just angry, no, it was something deeper. She had seen what real injustice looked like, not from a distance but close up, face to face, name to name. She remembered parents who begged for answers when their kids went missing, cops who cried off camera, prosecutors who worked through weekends for a case that no one else cared about. And now some man with shiny cufflinks was telling her that all of it, every arrest, every file, every warrant, was part of some orchestrated power play. That's when she reached for the microphone. She didn't slam her hand down. She didn't huff or roll her eyes. She simply leaned forward and pressed the button. A small red light clicked on. Halbridge didn't look at her at first, but the silence made him. Everyone turned, even the staffers stopped typing. Shh. Began softly, Mr. Chairman, if I may. And that's when the entire room shifted, but nobody, absolutely nobody, was ready for what she said next. Senator Halbert sat back in his leather chair, arms folded across his chest, lips curled into the faintest smirk. He was confident, no doubt about it. After all he had just delivered, the kind of soundbite that would play on the news all night, maybe even make the rounds on social media by afternoon. He wasn't just making a point. He was performing, and he thought he owned the stage. You have the floor, Ms. Bondi, the chairman said, his voice flat but curious. Pam adjusted her microphone just slightly. She didn't look at Halbridge right away. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned to the chairman and started speaking, not with anger, not with emotion, but with something far more dangerous in a hearing room: clarity. I listened carefully to Senator Halbridge's remarks, she began, and I'd like to respond not as a political figure, but as someone who has spent more than 2 decades on the front lines of law enforcement, and prosecution that caught the room off guard. She wasn't going to match his volume or attack his character. She was going to let the fact speak. And that's exactly what made her dangerous. Halbridge leaned forward, slightly trying to interrupt, if I may. Pam didn't even look at him. "You've had your time, Senator.